The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sawdust hit me as I walked into Thompson Construction that Tuesday morning, the same way it had for the past 8 years. But something felt different. Rebecca's BMW was already in the parking lot, which was unusual since she rarely arrived before 9. Through the frosted glass of Dad's office, I could see two silhouettes leaning over his desk, their voices hushed but intense. My sister's perfectly manicured hand was gesturing animatedly while Dad sat rigidly in his chair, shoulders tense in that way that meant he was being pushed into a corner he didn't want to be in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'd been running this company's day-to-day operations since I was 22, working my way up from carrying lumber to managing million-dollar contracts. Every client knew my name, every subcontractor had my number, and every project bore my signature attention to detail. But as I watched Rebecca lean closer to Dad's desk, pointing at what looked like financial reports, a cold certainty settled in my stomach. She was making her move, and I had a sinking feeling it involved me. The door to Dad's office opened with a sharp click, and Rebecca emerged first, her smile too bright, too practiced. She'd always been the golden child, the one who went to Northwestern for business while I stayed home learning the trade from the ground up. When Mom got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer 6 months ago, Rebecca suddenly decided it was time to help with the family business, which mostly meant criticizing everything I'd built while Dad was spending his days at the hospital. Dad followed her out, his face pale and drawn. At 64, Robert Thompson had built Thompson Construction from nothing, turning a single pickup truck and a toolbox into Cedar Rapids' most trusted contracting company. But Mom's illness had aged him 10 years and 6 months. The chemotherapy appointments, the sleepless nights, the constant worry had left him vulnerable, and Rebecca had been circling like a hawk ever since she moved back from Chicago. "Alex, I need to see you in my office," Dad said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. There was something final in his tone, something that made the other employees look up from their morning routines. Patricia Wells, our office manager who'd been with us for 15 years, gave me a worried glance. She'd seen the writing on the wall too. I followed Dad into his office, Rebecca trailing behind with a manila folder clutched against her chest. The walls were lined with photos of completed projects, awards from the Chamber of Commerce, and a picture of our whole family from last Christmas, back when Mom still had her hair, and we all believed everything would work out fine. Dad sat heavily in his leather chair, the one Mom had bought him for his 50th birthday. Rebecca positioned herself beside his desk like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. The morning light streaming through the windows cast harsh shadows across both their faces. "Alex," Dad began, then stopped, rubbing his temples. "This isn't easy for me to say." He glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. "I've been reviewing the company's performance, and there are some concerning issues that have come to light." My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "What kind of issues?" Rebecca stepped forward, opening her folder with theatrical precision. "Cost overruns on the Riverside Shopping Center project, delayed completion on the Miller residential contract, and client complaints about communication breakdowns." She spread the papers across Dad's desk like accusations. "These problems all trace back to project management decisions." I stared at the documents, recognizing my handwriting on several of them. But the context was all wrong. The Riverside project had cost overruns because the client requested major design changes mid-construction, changes I'd documented extensively. The Miller contract was delayed because of 3 weeks of torrential rain that made foundation work impossible. And the communication issues she was referencing were from one difficult client who complained about everything, including the color of our work trucks. "Rebecca, you know those situations were beyond my control," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I have documentation for every decision, every delay, every change order. She shook her head with false sympathy. That's exactly the problem, Alex. You're always making excuses instead of taking responsibility. Dad needs someone who can handle problems, not create them. Dad looked between us, exhaustion written across his features. Your sister has been helping me analyze our operations while I've been dealing with your mother's treatment. She's shown me inefficiencies I hadn't noticed before. The word inefficiencies hit me like a punch to the gut. Every system, every process, every relationship with subcontractors and suppliers, I'd built from the ground up. Thompson Construction ran smoother than any of our competitors, and our profit margins proved it. But here was Rebecca, fresh from her MBA program, reducing 8 years of my work to a few cherry-picked problems taken completely out of context. "What are you saying, Dad?" I asked, though I already knew. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Rebecca answered for him. "We need a change in project management. Someone with fresh perspective and proper business training." She paused dramatically. "I'm taking over your responsibilities, effective immediately." The office fell silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Mike Stevens starting up the company truck outside. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to correct her, to remember that I was the one who'd been here through every late-night emergency, every difficult client, every expansion and setback. But he just stared at his hands. "Dad," I said quietly, "you're firing me." He finally looked up, and I saw genuine pain in his eyes. "Not firing, Alex, we're restructuring. With everything happening with your mother, I need to streamline operations. Rebecca has the business education to modernize our processes." "What about my business education? 8 years of learning this company inside and out. What about the relationships I've built, the clients who specifically ask for me, the contracts I'm currently managing?" Rebecca's voice was smooth as silk. "Those relationships will transfer to me. The clients care about Thompson Construction, not individual employees. And the contracts can be managed by someone with proper training." I felt something snap inside me. But years of working with Dad had taught me when to push and when to retreat. This wasn't a battle I could win with emotion, not when Rebecca had spent months positioning herself as the responsible daughter while I was just the hands-on worker. "When does this restructuring take effect?" I asked. "Today," Rebecca said with barely concealed satisfaction. "I'll need access to all your project files, client contacts, and vendor relationships by end of business." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Alex, you're not being let go entirely. You can stay on as a site supervisor, working directly under Rebecca's management." The offer was meant to soften the blow, but it was actually worse than being fired outright. Going from running the company to
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
taking orders from my sister, watching her undo everything I'd built, would be torture. And Rebecca's smirk told me she knew it. "I need some time to think about that," I said, standing up. "Can I have the rest of the day to transition my active projects?" Dad nodded quickly, relief flooding his face. "Of course. Take whatever time you need." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been sucker punched. Patricia looked up from her desk with knowing eyes, but I just shook my head and kept walking. Out in the shop, Mike was loading materials for the Henderson Deck project, humming an old country song. Danny Rodriguez was bent over blueprints for the new medical office building, the biggest contract we'd landed all year. These were my people, my projects, my life's work. And Rebecca was about to take it all. I spent the morning gathering my files, making copies of everything Rebecca would need to avoid completely destroying the company. Despite my anger, I couldn't sabotage the business Dad had spent his life building. Especially not while Mom was fighting for her life. Every document I copied felt like signing my own resignation letter. The Henderson project was scheduled to start foundation work tomorrow. The medical office building required city permits that were still pending, and I was the only one who knew which inspector to call to expedite them. The Riverside Shopping Center, despite Rebecca's claims about cost overruns, was actually ahead of schedule and under budget when you factored in the client changes she'd conveniently omitted from her analysis. Patricia knocked on my temporary workspace around noon. "Alex, honey, what's really happening here?" I looked up from the stack of contracts I was organizing. Patricia had watched me grow up in this business, had covered for me when I made rookie mistakes, had celebrated with me when I landed my first big independent contract. If anyone deserved the truth, it was her. "Rebecca's taking over project management," I said simply. Her face went white. "That girl doesn't know construction from cosmetics. She's been here 6 months and still can't tell a 2x4 from a 2x6. She has an MBA, I said with bitter humor. She has a piece of paper. You have 8 years of experience and relationships that took decades to build. Patricia sat down across from me. "Your father's not thinking clearly right now. Between your mother's treatment and the stress, he's not making good decisions." I appreciated her loyalty, but Patricia didn't understand the bigger picture. This wasn't just about business qualifications. This was about Rebecca positioning herself as the responsible, educated child, while I was relegated to the role of the blue-collar worker who'd never amounted to more than manual labor. In Rebecca's narrative, I was holding the company back from its true potential. "Maybe she's right," I said, surprising myself with the words. "Maybe the company needs someone with formal business training," Patricia snorted. "Business training doesn't teach you how to handle a foundation crisis at 6 in the morning, or how to calm down a panicked client when their contractor disappears. Rebecca's never even been on a job site when something went wrong." But even as Patricia spoke, I knew the decision was made. Dad was overwhelmed, scared about Mom, and desperate for someone to take responsibility off his shoulders. Rebecca had presented herself as the solution to all his problems, complete with charts and analysis that made my hands-on approach look primitive and inefficient. I finished organizing the transition files by mid-afternoon. Each folder represented months of work, relationships built on trust and competence, systems I developed through trial and error. I created detailed notes for every active project, every pending issue, every client preference and vendor relationship. If Rebecca was going to run things, at least she'd have the information she needed to avoid complete disaster. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even as she was pushing me out, I was still trying to protect her and the company from the consequences of her inexperience. Around 4 o'clock, Rebecca appeared at my workspace with a legal pad and a confident smile, ready to walk me through everything. We spent 2 hours going over the active projects. I explained the Henderson Deck's drainage issues, the permit delays on the medical building, the client's specific requirements for the Riverside project. Rebecca took notes with the focused intensity of a student cramming for finals, but I could see in her eyes that she was already overwhelmed by the complexity of what she was taking on. "This seems like a lot of micromanagement," she said when I explained our quality control procedures. "Can't we streamline these processes?" "Every procedure exists because of a problem we encountered," I explained patiently. The Henderson family specifically requested daily progress updates because their last contractor disappeared for a week without communication. The medical building permits require 3 separate inspections because of new city regulations. "These aren't arbitrary rules, Rebecca, they're solutions to real problems." She waved dismissively. "I understand, but I think we can be more efficient. Sometimes you have to trust that things will work out instead of trying to control every detail." That statement crystallized everything wrong with her approach. In construction, details matter. One missed inspection could delay a project for weeks. One miscommunication with a client could cost thousands in change orders. One shortcut on materials could result in callbacks that destroyed our reputation. But Rebecca saw all of that careful attention as inefficiency, as evidence that I didn't understand modern business practices. To her, my thoroughness was a weakness to be corrected, not a strength to be valued. By 6 o'clock, I'd transferred everything I could. Rebecca had pages of notes, copies of every active file, and access to all the digital systems. Theoretically, she had everything she needed to step into my role seamlessly. "Thank you for making this transition so smooth," she said as I packed up my personal items. "I know this isn't easy, but I think you'll see that this change is best for everyone." I looked at her across the desk that had been mine for 3 years, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd built, and felt a strange sense of detachment. This was no longer my responsibility. Whatever happened next would be on her shoulders, not mine. "I hope you're right," I said, and meant it. The next morning, I woke up with nowhere to go. For 8 years, my routine had been the same: coffee, shower, drive to the office, dive into whatever crisis or opportunity the day brought. Now I sat in my kitchen, watching the clock tick past 7:30, feeling untethered and purposeless. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike Stevens. "Where are you? Henderson job starts in an hour, and Rebecca's nowhere to be found." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Talk to Rebecca. She's handling all project management now." 20 minutes later, Danny Rodriguez called. "Alex, man, the city inspector is here for the medical building foundation inspection, but we don't have the permit paperwork. Rebecca said she'd handle it, but nobody can reach her. Did you try the office? Patricia says she's not in yet. The inspector says he can wait 30 minutes, tops, or we have to reschedule for next week." Next week would put the entire project behind schedule and trigger penalty clauses in our contract. I knew exactly where the permits were and which form the inspector needed, could solve the problem with a 5-minute phone call. But that wasn't my job anymore. "You'll have to work it out with Rebecca," I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. By 10 o'clock, my phone was ringing constantly. Patricia called to say the Henderson family was asking why no one had shown up for their scheduled foundation pour. Mike called to report that the concrete truck had been sent away because no one could confirm the delivery address. Danny called again to say the inspector had left and rescheduled for the following Tuesday. Each call was like watching a slow-motion car crash, seeing months of careful planning and relationship building collapse, because the person in charge didn't understand the intricate choreography required to keep multiple projects running smoothly. Around noon, Rebecca finally called me directly. Her voice was strained, barely controlled panic bleeding through her professional facade. "Alex, I need your help. There are some issues with today's scheduled work, and I could use your insight." "What kind of issues?" "The Henderson Foundation pour didn't happen, the medical building inspection was postponed, and apparently there are 3 other projects that need immediate attention. I thought you said everything was organized." I felt no satisfaction in her predicament, only a deep sadness for what was happening to Dad's company. "Everything was organized, Rebecca. Construction requires constant coordination. You can't manage it from an office with a to-do list." "I know that," she snapped. "I just need to get caught up. Can you come in and help me sort through these priorities?" The request hung in the air between us. She was asking me to clean up the mess she'd created in less than 24 hours, to bail her out of the consequences of her own overconfidence. Part of me wanted to help, if only to protect Dad's business, and the employees who depended on it. But another part knew that rescuing her now would only enable more disasters down the road. "I'm not an employee anymore, Rebecca. You made that clear yesterday. You're still part of this family, and this is still Dad's company." She was right, of course. Thompson Construction wasn't just my job, it was my identity, my legacy, my contribution to something bigger than myself. But it was also the weapon she'd used to push me aside, the proof of her superiority over the brother who'd never been smart enough to get a real education. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. The rest of the day passed in a haze of unanswered calls and mounting crisis reports. By evening, I knew that Rebecca's first day as project manager had been an unmitigated disaster. 3 separate projects were now behind schedule, 2 clients were threatening to hire other contractors, and the crew was starting to question whether Thompson Construction still knew how to run a job site. I sat on my apartment balcony as the sun set over Cedar Rapids, thinking about Mom lying in her hospital bed 40 miles away, Dad sitting beside her holding her hand while his life's work imploded under his daughter's management. Tomorrow would bring new crises, more frantic phone calls, more evidence that experience couldn't be replaced by education alone. But it would also bring something else, the inevitable moment when Dad would have to confront the reality of what he'd allowed to happen, when he'd have to choose between his daughter's pride and his company's survival. And maybe, just maybe, that moment would reveal something about family, loyalty, and the true value of the work I'd poured my heart into for 8 years. The phone rang again. This time, it was Dad. Dad's voice was barely above a whisper when I answered the phone. "Alex, can you meet me at the hospital? Your mother wants to see you." The drive to Cedar Rapids Medical Center gave me 45 minutes to prepare myself for what I might find. Mom had been getting weaker with each chemo session, her once vibrant energy reduced to brief moments of clarity between waves of exhaustion. But her mind remained sharp, and I suspected she'd already heard about the changes at the company through Dad's worried conversations with her doctors and nurses. I found them in the oncology wing's family consultation room, a sterile space designed for difficult conversations. Mom was in her wheelchair, a colorful scarf covering her head, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence that had helped her build Thompson Construction's reputation for honest dealing and quality work. Dad sat beside her, looking older than his 64 years, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "There's my project manager," Mom said with a weak smile, using the title she'd given me years ago when I first started running jobs independently. But there was something searching in her gaze, as if she could sense the tension radiating from both Dad and me. "Hi Mom, how are you feeling today?" "Like I've been hit by a cement truck," she said with characteristic bluntness, "but that's not why we're here. Your father tells me there have been some changes at the office." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Linda, we discussed this. The restructuring is temporary, just until things stabilize." Mom's gaze never left my face. "Is that what we're calling it? Restructuring?" She paused, studying my expression. "Alex, honey, tell me what really happened." The story came out in careful measured words. I explained Rebecca's analysis, her concerns about inefficiencies, Dad's decision to put her in charge of project management. I kept my tone neutral, professional, the same way I'd present a project status report to a demanding client. But Mom had known me since I was 5 years old, building elaborate structures with Lincoln logs, while Rebecca played with her dolls. She could read between every line. When I finished, the room fell silent except for the hum of medical equipment and distant conversations in the hallway. Mom reached over and took Dad's hand, her grip still strong despite everything the cancer had taken from her. "Robert," she said quietly, "what have you done?" Dad's face flushed. "I made a business decision based on what's best for the company long term. Rebecca has the education and fresh perspective we need." "Rebecca has been home for 6 months, Mom replied, her voice gaining strength. "Alex has been running that company for years. He knows every client, every supplier, every worker. He is Thompson Construction." "That's exactly the problem," Dad said, his own voice rising slightly. "Too much dependence on one person. What happens if something happens to Alex? We need systems, proper management structure, professional oversight." The irony of his words hung in the air. Here he was, worried about something happening to me, while his wife lay dying, and his daughter was systematically destroying everything I'd built in less than 48 hours. Mom turned back to me. "How bad is it, sweetheart?" I wanted to protect her from the truth, to let her focus on fighting cancer without worrying about the family business. But the exhaustion in her eyes told me she already knew this was bigger than a simple restructuring. The Henderson Foundation pour was canceled because no one coordinated with the concrete company. The medical building inspection was postponed because the permits weren't ready. Mike Stevens called me 3 times yesterday, asking for guidance that I can't give anymore. Dad rubbed his temples. Growing pains. Rebecca will find her rhythm. Robert, Mom said with the quiet authority she'd always wielded in family matters, construction isn't something you learn from books, it's not a classroom exercise where you can revise your answers if you get them wrong. When that concrete truck shows up at 7 in the morning, you either have everything ready, or you cost the company thousands of dollars and damage relationships that took years to build. I understand that, Linda, but we can't keep depending on Alex forever. He's never going to grow professionally if he doesn't face some challenges, and the company needs to evolve beyond one-person management. The words hit me like a physical blow. In Dad's mind, I wasn't the experienced professional who'd helped build Thompson Construction into Cedar Rapids' premier contractor. I was still the kid who needed to be pushed out of the nest, challenged to grow up and face the real world. 8 years of 12-hour days, weekend emergencies, and increasingly complex projects had somehow failed to convince him that I'd already grown into exactly what the company needed. Mom was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Dad and me. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years of marriage and business partnership. Robert, I've supported every major decision you've made since we started this company. I stood by you when you wanted to take that first big commercial contract that everyone said would bankrupt us. I backed you when you insisted on paying our workers above union scale because you believed it was the right thing to do. I agreed when you wanted to expand into residential development, even though I thought it was too risky. She paused, gathering strength for what came next, but this decision pushing Alex aside for Rebecca, this isn't about business. This is about you trying to prove that your daughter's college education was worth more than your son's 8 years of dedication. And it's going to destroy everything we built together. The words hung in the sterile air, like a diagnosis no one wanted to hear. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: hurt, anger, defensiveness, and finally something that might have been recognition. But before he could respond, a soft knock interrupted us. Dr. Foster entered with a gentle smile and a tablet in her hands. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have Linda's latest test results, and I thought you'd want to hear them together. The next 20 minutes changed everything. Dr. Foster's words were careful, clinical, but their meaning was unmistakable. The latest round of chemotherapy hadn't been as effective as hoped. The tumors had stabilized, but hadn't shrunk significantly. More aggressive treatment would be necessary, including a procedure that would require weeks of recovery and around-the-clock care. Mom listened to the medical details with the same focused attention she'd once brought to reviewing contracts and budgets. Dad asked questions about timelines and treatment options, his businessman's mind trying to organize an inherently unorganizable situation. But I could see the fear in both their eyes, the recognition that we were entering a phase where business concerns would have to take a back seat to more fundamental questions of life and death. When Dr. Foster left, we sat in silence for several minutes. The family consultation room, with its careful neutrality and tissues placed strategically on every surface, suddenly felt like what it was, a place where families received life-changing news and tried to figure out how to move forward. I need to ask you both something, Mom said finally, her voice smaller, but more determined than before. The next few months are going to be harder than anything we faced as a family. I need to know that the company, our life's work, is in capable hands. I need to know that the people who depend on Thompson Construction for their livelihoods won't suffer because we're focused on my treatment. She looked directly at Dad. Can you honestly tell me that Rebecca is ready for that responsibility? Dad opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. In the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room, with his wife's mortality suddenly front and center, the business school theories and efficiency reports that had seemed so compelling 2 days ago looked fragile and inadequate. His phone buzzed with a text message. Then another, and another. You should check those, Mom said quietly. The first message was from Patricia, emergency at Riverside Project, client threatening to walk, need immediate response. The second was from Mike Stevens, foundation crew walked off Henderson job, concrete mixer damaged their lawn. Family wants compensation, Rebecca not answering phone.
The third was from Danny Rodriguez. City inspector failed medical building electrical. Need re-inspection by Friday, or we lose our slot until next month. Major delay. Dad stared at the messages, his face growing paler with each one. 3 separate crises, each one requiring immediate attention from someone who understood the intricacies of construction management, client relations, and municipal bureaucracy. Rebecca had been in charge for 36 hours, and Thompson Construction was facing the worst operational crisis in its 25-year history. Robert, Mom said gently, call her, see how she's handling it. Dad's hands shook slightly as he dialed Rebecca's number. The call went straight to voicemail. He tried again with the same result. Finally, he called the office directly. Patricia, it's Robert, where's Rebecca? Even from across the room, I could hear the tension in Patricia's voice through the phone speaker. She left around noon, said she had a family emergency. Mr. Thompson, we've got 3 major problems that need immediate attention, and I don't know who's supposed to handle them. The Riverside client is threatening to terminate their contract over communication failures. The Henderson family is talking about suing us over property damage, and if we don't get the medical building re-inspection by Friday, we're looking at a month delay that'll trigger penalty clauses. Dad's grip tightened on the phone. Have you tried reaching Alex? I didn't know if I was supposed to. Rebecca made it clear yesterday that all project decisions go through her now. Dad looked at Mom, then at me, his expression a mixture of panic and dawning realization. The theoretical restructuring he'd approved in the comfortable abstraction of his office was colliding with the real-world consequences of running a
construction company where decisions mattered and timing was everything. Patricia, I'm putting Alex back on project management effective immediately. Have him handle all 3 situations and tell the clients that we're addressing their concerns with our most experienced manager. Should I let Rebecca know? Dad hesitated for a moment. I'll handle Rebecca. Just get Alex whatever support he needs to fix these problems. He ended the call and looked at me with something approaching desperation. Alex, I know I have no right to ask this after what happened, but the company needs you. Can you go in there and clean up this mess? The request hung between us like a bridge. Neither of us was sure could bear the weight of everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to say no, to let Dad and Rebecca deal with the consequences of their decision. Another part of me, the part that had grown up in Thompson Construction's shop and office, couldn't bear to watch everything we'd built collapse over pride and misguided business theories. But there was a third consideration, one that trumped my hurt feelings and Rebecca's ambitions. Mom needed to focus on fighting cancer without worrying that her family's legacy was crumbling. She'd spent 25 years building Thompson Construction alongside Dad, handling the books, managing client relationships, creating the culture of honest dealing and quality work that had made us Cedar Rapids' most trusted contractor. Letting it fail now would be like watching a piece of her die before the cancer could finish its work. I'll go in, I said finally, but we need to be clear about authority and decision-making. I can't fix these problems if someone else is going to second-guess every choice I make. You have full authority, Dad said quickly. Whatever you need, whatever decisions have to be made, you handle them. What about Rebecca? Dad's expression hardened with resolution I hadn't seen since Mom's diagnosis. I'll deal with Rebecca. This is about the company's survival now, not family politics. Mom reached out and squeezed my hand. Thank you, sweetheart. I know this isn't easy, but you're the only one who can save what we built. The drive back to Thompson Construction felt surreal, like returning to a crime scene where I was both victim and investigator. Patricia met me at the door with a thick folder of crisis reports and a look of profound relief. Thank God you're back, she said. It's been chaos since yesterday morning. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in construction crisis management. I started with the Riverside project, calling the client directly to apologize for the communication breakdown and scheduling an on-site meeting for the next morning. The key was acknowledging their frustration without admitting fault, then demonstrating immediate responsiveness to rebuild their confidence in Thompson Construction's competence. The Henderson situation required more delicate handling. The concrete mixer had indeed damaged their newly sodded lawn when the driver, lacking proper guidance about access routes, had taken the most direct path to the foundation site. I arranged for a landscaping crew to repair the damage at our expense and personally apologized to Mrs. Henderson, explaining that a communication error had led to the problem. The family agreed to proceed with the project once they saw we were taking full responsibility for the mistake. The medical building electrical inspection failure was the most technically complex issue. The city inspector had found code violations in the initial electrical rough-in, problems that stemmed from using a new subcontractor Rebecca had hired based solely on their low bid. I knew the inspector personally, had worked with him on a dozen previous projects, and was able to schedule an emergency re-inspection for Thursday afternoon. But first, I had to get our regular electrical contractor to come in and fix the violations, which meant paying premium rates for rush work on a project that was already tight on margins. By 7 o'clock that evening, all three crises were contained, not solved completely, but stabilized enough that Thompson Construction wouldn't be facing lawsuits, contract terminations, or catastrophic delays. The office felt normal again, with the controlled chaos of a functioning construction company rather than the panicked confusion that had reigned for the previous day and a half. Patricia brought me a cup of coffee as I finished updating the project status reports. "It's good to have someone in charge who actually knows what they're doing," she said. "I was starting to think we might not survive Rebecca's learning curve. Where is she anyway?" Patricia's expression soured. "She called around 2 o'clock, said she had a family emergency, and would be out for the rest of the day. Didn't say what kind of emergency or when she'd be back." I had a sinking suspicion that Rebecca's family emergency was actually a strategic retreat, a way to avoid dealing with the mounting crises she'd created through inexperience and overconfidence. It was easier to disappear and let someone else clean up the mess than to admit that managing a construction company required more than MBA coursework and theoretical knowledge. My phone rang as I was preparing to leave for the day. Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. "Alex," she said without preamble, "I understand you went behind my back and took over my projects." The accusation was so brazen, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. "Rebecca, your projects were failing. 3 separate clients were threatening to terminate contracts because of problems that arose under your management. Those were temporary setbacks. I was developing solutions. You disappeared for 6 hours without telling anyone where you were or when you'd be back. The Henderson family was ready to sue us, the Riverside client was talking about hiring another contractor, and the medical building inspection failure could have cost us a month-long delay. I had to handle a personal matter, and I resent the implication that I can't manage these situations. I have extensive training in crisis management and client relations." The disconnect between her words and reality was staggering. In her mind, she was still the qualified professional whose authority had been undermined by her inexperienced brother. The actual consequences of her decisions, the tangible damage to client relationships and project timelines, were apparently less important than maintaining her narrative of competence. "Rebecca, this isn't about training or qualifications anymore, it's about results." Thompson Construction was facing its worst operational crisis in 25 years. "Dad asked me to step back in because the company was in danger of collapse. Dad was manipulated by your dramatic crisis reports. If you'd supported my transition instead of undermining it, these problems could have been avoided." The conversation was pointless. Rebecca had constructed a version of events where she was the victim of sabotage rather than the author of her own failures. No amount of factual evidence would penetrate that defensive barrier, because admitting error would mean acknowledging that her 8 years of experience might actually matter more than her business degree. "I'm not going to argue with you," I said finally. "The projects are stable now, the clients are satisfied, and the company is back on track. That's what matters. This isn't over, Alex. Dad made a commitment to modernizing our operations, and I intend to hold him to it. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone in the office with the weight of what had just been revealed. Rebecca wasn't retreating or admitting defeat. She was regrouping, planning her next move in what she apparently saw as an ongoing power struggle, rather than a question of competence and company survival. I looked around the office that had been my professional home for 8 years, at the project boards covered with timelines and specifications, at the photos of completed buildings that represented thousands of hours of careful work and relationship building. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new crises to manage, new proof that construction was a business where experience mattered more than theory. But tonight, for the first time since Rebecca's coup attempt began, Thompson Construction felt like itself again, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to carry us through whatever came next. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. I arrived at the office to find a sleek black Mercedes parked in our small lot, its driver leaning against the hood with the patient posture of someone accustomed to waiting. He was a tall man in his 60s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested serious money and serious business. Patricia met me at the door with raised eyebrows. He's been waiting for 20 minutes, says his name is Harrison and he needs to speak with you about a confidential matter. William Harrison introduced himself with a firm handshake and a business card that identified him as senior partner at Harrison, Mitchell & Associates, one of Cedar Rapids' most prestigious law firms. His presence in our modest office, surrounded by the organized chaos of a working construction company, felt incongruous and somehow ominous. Thompson, I represent certain interests that have been monitoring the recent changes in your company's management structure, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the careful precision of someone choosing his words deliberately. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Harrison opened a leather portfolio and extracted a thick manila folder. My client has significant commercial real estate holdings in the Cedar Rapids area. Thompson Construction has been under consideration for several major projects, pending evaluation of your operational stability and management competence. He paused, letting the implication sink in. Someone with serious money had been watching our company, assessing whether we were worth investing in, and the recent chaos under Rebecca's management had apparently caught their attention. The events of the past few days have raised concerns about Thompson Construction's ability to handle large-scale, time-sensitive projects. Missed deadlines, client complaints, and apparent management instability are red flags for any potential partnership. My stomach dropped. Word of Rebecca's failures had already spread beyond our immediate client base, reaching the level where major investors were questioning our reliability. In a business built on reputation and relationships, that kind of damage could take years to repair. However, Harrison continued, my client is also aware that you've recently resumed project management responsibilities, and that the immediate crises have been resolved. This suggests that the problems may have been temporary rather than systemic. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more direct. Mr. Thompson, I'm authorized to discuss a development opportunity that could transform your company's future, but it requires assurance that Thompson Construction is under competent, experienced management. The folder he placed on my desk contained preliminary plans for a mixed-use development on the outskirts of Cedar Rapids, office buildings, retail space, and residential units totaling nearly $8 million in construction contracts. It was the kind of project that could establish Thompson Construction as a major regional contractor, the logical culmination of everything Dad had worked toward for 25 years. This is contingent on stable management, I asked. Among other factors, yes. My client needs confidence that deadlines will be met, quality standards maintained, and communication handled professionally. Based on recent events, that confidence has been shaken. Harrison stood, leaving the folder on my desk. I'll be in touch within the next few weeks to discuss this opportunity further. I trust that by then any management uncertainties will have been resolved.
After he left, I sat staring at the development plans, trying to process the magnitude of what had just been offered and what it meant for Thompson Construction's future. This wasn't just about fixing Rebecca's mistakes or restoring our reputation with existing clients. This was about positioning the company for the kind of growth that could secure jobs for our employees, financial stability for Dad and Mom, and a legacy worth passing on to the next generation. But it was also a test, a direct challenge to prove that Thompson Construction deserved to be considered for major league projects. And that test would be judged not just on our technical competence, but on our management stability and operational reliability. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Dad, calling from the hospital. "Alex, how did things go yesterday? Were you able to handle those problems?" "Everything's under control, the clients are satisfied, the projects are back on schedule, and the immediate crises are resolved. Thank God. I've been worried sick about it." He paused, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "There's something else we need to discuss. Rebecca came by the hospital last night, and she's not happy about the management change. She's talking about taking legal action to enforce what she calls her promised authority over company operations." The words hit me like a cold slap. Rebecca wasn't just refusing to accept her failure, she was preparing to weaponize the legal system to force her way back into control regardless of the damage it might cause to the company or the family. What kind of legal action? She claims I made verbal commitments about her role in the company, promises that constitute a binding agreement. She's talking about breach of contract, diminished career prospects, damage to her professional reputation. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine explaining to William Harrison's client that Thompson Construction was embroiled in a family lawsuit over management authority, while trying to bid on an $8 million development project. "Dad, this could destroy everything we've built. If word gets out that we're fighting internal legal battles over basic management decisions, no serious client will trust us with major projects." "I know, son, but Rebecca seems determined to push this as far as she can. She says she won't let her business education and professional training be dismissed because of family politics." The irony was breathtaking. Rebecca, whose mismanagement had nearly destroyed the company in 36 hours, was now threatening to finish the job through legal action, all in the name of protecting her professional reputation and business education. "What does Mom think about this?" Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother is focusing on her treatment right now. The doctors want to start a more aggressive chemotherapy protocol next week, and she needs all her energy for fighting this cancer. I don't want her worrying about family legal battles on top of everything else." The weight of the situation settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. Mom was fighting for her life. Dad was stretched to his breaking point trying to care for her while keeping the company afloat. Rebecca was threatening to destroy everything out of wounded pride, and I was somehow expected to hold it all together while proving to major investors that Thompson Construction deserved their confidence. But as I looked at the development plans spread across my desk, at the evidence of what our company could become with the right opportunities and stable management, I felt something harden inside me. This wasn't just about family dynamics or hurt feelings anymore. This was about preserving something worth preserving, about protecting the livelihoods of employees who'd invested their careers in Thompson Construction, about ensuring that Dad and Mom's 25 years of work meant something lasting. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "let me handle Rebecca. You focus on taking care of Mom and getting her through this treatment. Whatever Rebecca's planning, whatever legal threats she's making, I'll deal with it." "Alex, I can't ask you to fight your sister on top of everything else you're doing." "You're not asking, I'm volunteering. Thompson Construction is too important to let it be destroyed by family politics and wounded pride. We've got employees depending on us, clients trusting us, and opportunities that could secure our future for decades." I thought about William Harrison's folder, about the $8 million in potential contracts waiting for proof that we could handle major projects with professional competence and management stability. Besides, I added, sometimes the best way to handle family is to stop treating business like a family matter and start treating it like what it is, a business that needs to succeed or everyone suffers. Dad was quiet for a moment, then sighed deeply. Your mother always said you had the strongest backbone of any of us. I just hope we're not asking too much of you. You built this company from nothing, Dad. The least I can do is make sure it survives to fulfill its potential. After we hung up, I sat alone in the office, surrounded by the familiar sounds of a construction company in full swing, phones ringing, printers humming, the distant sound of truck engines and power tools. Outside the window, Mike Stevens was loading materials for the Henderson Deck project, the same project that had nearly collapsed under Rebecca's mismanagement just days earlier. The folder containing the development plan seemed to glow with possibility, a vision of what Thompson Construction could become with the right leadership and the right opportunities. But standing between that future and the present moment was a family civil war that threatened to destroy everything before we could prove ourselves worthy of major investor confidence. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. If Rebecca wanted to turn this into a legal battle, she was about to discover that 8 years of managing construction projects had taught me something about preparation, documentation, and playing to win when everything important was on the line. The war for Thompson Construction's future was about to begin in earnest. Family Business Story Alternative Part 6-9. The envelope arrived by courier at 7:30 the next morning, marked personal and confidential with the return address of Blackwood and Associates Attorneys at Law. I recognized the name immediately. They were the most expensive litigation firm in Cedar Rapids, the kind of lawyers you hired when you wanted to destroy someone rather than simply win a case. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter demanding that I immediately stop interfering with Rebecca's management authority at Thompson Construction. The language was precise and threatening, claiming that my unauthorized resumption of project management duties constituted tortious interference with contractual relationships and was causing irreparable harm to Rebecca's professional reputation and career prospects. The letter gave me 48 hours to restore Rebecca to full project management authority, or face immediate legal action including claims for damages, lost profits, and punitive relief. It was signed by Victoria Blackwood herself, a woman whose reputation for ruthless corporate warfare was legendary throughout Iowa's business community. I set the letter aside and tried to focus on the morning's project coordination calls, but the implications kept gnawing at me. Rebecca wasn't just making empty threats about family disagreements, she'd hired serious legal firepower and was apparently prepared to wage scorched-earth litigation against her own family's business. The irony was staggering. Here I was, trying to save Thompson Construction from the operational chaos Rebecca had created, while she was threatening to destroy the company through expensive lawsuits if I didn't let her continue creating that chaos. My phone rang at 8:15. Patricia's voice was tight with anxiety. Alex, there's a woman here who says she's from some law firm. She's asking to inspect company records and demanding copies of employment agreements and management documentation. She won't leave, and she's making our other employees nervous. Tell her she needs to schedule an appointment through proper channels. Don't give her access to any records without written authorization from Dad. She says she has legal authority to examine corporate documents as part of ongoing litigation. Alex, what's going on? Are we really being sued? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. Rebecca's legal strategy was becoming clear. She wasn't just threatening litigation, she was already treating Thompson Construction like a hostile target to be conquered through legal process. Patricia, lock down all company records and don't discuss business matters with anyone outside the company. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The drive to the office gave me time to think about Rebecca's escalation and what it revealed about her true motivations. Normal family business disputes got resolved through conversation and compromise. Legal warfare suggested something much more calculating and predetermined. I found the lawyer in our reception area, a sharply dressed woman in her 40s with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from winning cases through intimidation rather than merit. She was photographing our project status boards with her phone and making notes in a legal pad. "Excuse me," I said, "I'm Alex Thompson. I understand you're looking for company records." She turned with a smile that could have cut glass. "Diane Morrison, associate at Blackwood and Associates. I'm here conducting a preliminary investigation on behalf of our client regarding management disputes and potential employment law violations. Miss Morrison, this is a private business. You don't have authority to examine our records or photograph our proprietary information without proper legal authorization." "Actually, I do." She produced a document from her briefcase with the practiced efficiency of someone who specialized in ambush tactics. "This is a preservation notice requiring Thompson Construction to maintain all records related to employment agreements, management decisions, and personnel matters pending potential litigation." The document looked official enough, but something about her presentation felt staged and overly aggressive. Most employment law disputes started with negotiation and mediation, not document preservation orders and surprise office visits. "Miss Morrison, if your client has legitimate concerns about employment matters, there are proper channels for addressing them. Showing up at our office and demanding access to confidential business records isn't one of them." Her smile broadened. "Mr. Thompson, employment law doesn't recognize family business exceptions when it comes to contractual obligations and wrongful termination. Your sister was promised management authority, performed her duties in reliance on those promises, and suffered professional damages when that authority was illegally revoked." The language was almost identical to what Rebecca had used in our confrontation the previous day. It sounded rehearsed, like talking points they'd practiced together to create the appearance of legitimate legal claims. "What specific employment contract are you referring to?" I asked. Rebecca was never formally employed by Thompson Construction. She volunteered to help evaluate our operations, and when that evaluation created operational problems, her involvement was discontinued. Morrison's expression hardened slightly. "Verbal agreements constitute binding employment contracts when there's evidence of offer acceptance and performance. Your sister relocated from Chicago based on explicit promises of management authority from company ownership." "She relocated from Chicago because she was unemployed and facing financial difficulties," I replied. "Her involvement with Thompson Construction was temporary assistance during a family medical crisis, not formal employment with contractual obligations." The conversation was revealing more about Rebecca's legal strategy than Morrison probably intended. They were building a case based entirely on verbal understandings and Rebecca's interpretation of family discussions, which suggested they didn't have documented evidence of actual employment agreements. But Morrison wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, your sister also suffered
professional damages when her management authority was undermined. She had established relationships with clients and vendors that were disrupted by your unauthorized intervention. The only relationships that were disrupted were with clients who were threatening to terminate their contracts because of problems created during Rebecca's brief involvement. If anyone prevented professional damage, it was me by fixing the operational crisis she'd created." Morrison made notes in her legal pad with theatrical intensity. "Those are serious accusations, Mr. Thompson. Are you claiming that your sister was incompetent or deliberately sabotaging company operations?" The question was clearly designed to trap me into making inflammatory statements that could be used later in litigation. But it also revealed the fundamental weakness in their legal strategy. They were trying to separate Rebecca's management authority from accountability for her management results. I'm stating facts that are documented in client correspondence, project records, and employee witness statements. Rebecca's involvement with project management resulted in missed deadlines, client complaints, and operational failures that required immediate intervention to prevent contract terminations. Yet you acknowledge that she was granted management authority by company ownership. I acknowledge that Dad asked Rebecca to evaluate our operations and provide input on potential improvements. when that evaluation created serious problems with ongoing projects. Her involvement was discontinued to protect client relationships and employee job security. Morrison closed her legal pad with a sharp snap. Mr. Thompson, you'll be hearing from us very soon regarding formal legal action. We'll be pursuing all available remedies for breach of contract, wrongful termination, and tortious interference with legitimate business relationships. After she left, I called Dad immediately. His voice was strained when he answered, and I could hear hospital sounds in the background. Alex, I can't talk long. Your mother's having some complications with the treatment, and the doctors want to adjust her medication protocol. The news hit me like a physical blow. Mom's health crisis was escalating just as Rebecca's legal warfare was intensifying, creating a perfect storm of family and business pressures that threatened to overwhelm everything Dad had worked to build. How serious are the complications? They're not sure yet. The new chemotherapy is stronger than the previous treatment, and Mom's having more severe reactions than expected. They want to hospitalize her for closer monitoring. I closed my eyes trying to process the implications. Mom needed Dad's complete attention and emotional support during the most critical phase of her treatment. The last thing either of them needed was expensive, time-consuming litigation that would drain energy and resources from her medical care. Dad, Rebecca's lawyers were here this morning. They're talking about immediate legal action unless she's reinstated to management authority. Dad was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Alex, I can't deal with family legal battles right now. Your mother needs me here, and I can't divide my attention between her treatment and Rebecca's demands. What if we just give Rebecca what she wants temporarily? Let her have the management title while I continue handling the actual project work behind the scenes. That won't satisfy her. Rebecca doesn't want symbolic authority. She wants real control over contracts, client relationships, and company decisions. And based on what happened last week, giving her that control would be catastrophic for ongoing projects. The impossible situation was becoming clear. Rebecca's legal strategy was designed to exploit exactly this moment of family vulnerability, when Dad was too distracted by Mom's medical crisis to fight expensive litigation and too protective of company stability to risk her continued operational interference. Dad, what if there's another option? What if Rebecca's legal claims aren't as strong as her lawyers want us to believe? What do you mean? I mean, employment law requires actual employment relationships with documented agreements and legitimate expectations. Rebecca was never formally employed by Thompson Construction, never had written management agreements, and never performed successfully in any management role. Dad considered this for a moment. But she has recordings of our conversations where I discussed her potential involvement with company operations. Discussing potential involvement isn't the same as creating binding employment contracts, especially when that involvement was conditioned on successful performance and evaluation of results. Alex, I can't afford expensive legal battles right now, even if we might eventually win. The legal costs alone could cripple the company's cash flow, and the distraction could cause us to lose existing clients. He was right, of course. Rebecca's litigation strategy didn't need to succeed in court to achieve her goals. She just needed to create enough chaos and expense to force Dad into surrender through sheer exhaustion and financial pressure. But there was something about Morrison's presentation that had bothered me beyond the obvious intimidation tactics. Her questions and assumptions suggested she was working with incomplete or inaccurate information about Thompson Construction's actual operations and Rebecca's role in recent problems. Dad, what if Rebecca's lawyers don't actually understand the construction business or the specific problems her management created? What if they're building their case on her version of events without independent verification? I'm not sure I follow. Morrison asked if Rebecca was deliberately sabotaging operations, as if operational failure was either intentional sabotage or pure bad luck. She didn't seem to understand that construction management requires specific technical knowledge and experience that can't be learned from business school textbooks. The distinction was important because it suggested Rebecca's legal team was treating this like a standard employment dispute rather than a specialized industry situation where competence and experience were measurable, documented qualities rather than subjective opinions. Alex, even if you're right about their legal strategy, I still can't afford to fight expensive litigation while your mother is in the hospital. Then don't fight it, document it. What do you mean? I mean, let Rebecca's lawyers proceed with their legal action while we carefully document exactly what happens when she gets management authority. If they want to claim she's competent to manage complex construction projects, let them prove it through results rather than legal arguments. The idea was risky, but it had one major advantage: it would test Rebecca's actual abilities against her legal claims in a way that objective evidence could evaluate. If she succeeded as a construction manager, her legal position would be strengthened, but Thompson Construction would benefit. If she failed, her legal claims would be undermined by documented evidence of incompetence. That's gambling with client relationships and employee job security, Dad said. It's documenting reality instead of arguing about legal theories. Rebecca's lawyers can claim she was wrongfully terminated, but they can't explain away client complaints, missed deadlines, and operational failures that result from her management decisions. Dad was quiet for several minutes, and I could hear muffled conversations and medical equipment in the background. Finally, he spoke with the careful precision of someone making a decision under impossible circumstances. Alex, I need you to handle this situation however you think best. I trust your judgment, and I can't divide my attention between your mother's treatment and Rebecca's legal threats. I'll document everything and keep detailed records of all management decisions and their results. If Rebecca wants to prove her competence through legal process, we'll have objective evidence to evaluate her claims. Just promise me you won't let family conflicts destroy the business while I'm focused on saving your mother's life. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. Thompson Construction's survival, the livelihoods of 18 employees, the completion of existing contracts, and the protection of Dad's life work, all of it now depended on my ability to navigate Rebecca's legal warfare while maintaining operational competence. But there was something else driving my decision beyond business considerations. Mom had spent 25 years building Thompson Construction alongside Dad, handling the books, managing client relationships, creating the culture of honest dealing and quality work that defined our reputation. If her cancer treatment was entering a critical phase, the last thing she needed was the additional stress of watching her life's work destroyed by family legal battles. Dad, focus on taking care of Mom. I'll handle Rebecca and keep the business running. Whatever happens, Thompson Construction will be here when Mom recovers. The next morning brought an escalation I hadn't anticipated. Rebecca herself appeared at the construction office at 7:45, accompanied by a court officer and carrying what appeared to be official legal documents. Alex, she said with cold formality, I have a temporary restraining order requiring you to cease all interference with my management responsibilities at Thompson Construction. The court officer, a tired-looking man in his 50s, handed me the legal papers with the resigned expression of someone who delivered countless similar documents in family business disputes. Sir, this is a temporary order pending a formal hearing on management authority and employment obligations. You're required to comply immediately or face contempt of court charges. I scanned the document quickly, noting the legal language about irreparable harm, contractual obligations, and emergency relief pending full litigation. Rebecca had managed to convince a judge that her management authority was legitimate and that my project management role was causing immediate irreparable damage to her professional interests. The legal maneuvering was impressive in its speed and aggressiveness, but it also revealed something important about Rebecca's strategy. She wasn't interested in proving her competence through results. She was trying to establish authority through legal process, using court orders to bypass the normal business requirement that managers demonstrate their abilities through successful performance. Rebecca, I said carefully, do you understand the current status of our active projects and client obligations? I'll be reviewing all project documentation and implementing proper management systems, she replied.
The previous disorganized approach to construction management was causing client dissatisfaction and operational inefficiency. The statement was breathtaking in its disconnect from reality. Rebecca was describing her own 36 hours of catastrophic mismanagement as previous disorganized approach while positioning herself as the solution to problems she'd created. But the court order was clear and legally binding. I had no choice but to comply with the temporary restraining order while preparing for the formal hearing that would determine Thompson Construction's management structure. Patricia, I called to the office manager, please prepare complete project status reports for all active contracts. Rebecca will need detailed information about current obligations, deadlines, and client requirements. Rebecca's expression sharpened with suspicion. I don't need your interpretation of project status, Alex. I'll be conducting my own evaluation of company operations and client relationships. Of course, but you'll need accurate information about current commitments and deadlines to avoid the kind of operational problems that occurred during your previous involvement. The reminder of her earlier failures clearly stung, but Rebecca maintained her professional facade. Those were temporary adjustment issues while I established proper management protocols. This time, I'll have the authority and legal backing necessary to implement effective systems. Over the next 4 hours, I watched Rebecca attempt to resume management of Thompson Construction's active projects with the same combination of overconfidence and fundamental misunderstanding that had characterized her earlier disaster. But this time, I was documenting everything with the systematic thoroughness of someone building a legal defense. The Henderson Deck project was scheduled for concrete finishing work the next morning. Rebecca spent 20 minutes reviewing the project file, then called the concrete contractor to reschedule the work for the following week because she wanted to reassess the specifications and ensure quality standards. I noted in my documentation log that the delay would push the project past its contracted completion date and trigger penalty clauses that would cost Thompson Construction $1,500. More importantly, the Henderson family had scheduled landscaping work for the weekend following concrete completion, and Rebecca's delay would force them to reschedule multiple contractors and potentially delay their daughter's wedding reception. The medical building electrical inspection was set for Thursday afternoon. Rebecca decided that the electrical contractor's work needed additional oversight and quality verification and postponed the inspection until the following Tuesday. She apparently didn't realize that delaying the inspection would push the entire project timeline back by a full week, triggering contractor penalty clauses and forcing the client to postpone their planned office opening. I documented the delay and its contractual implications, then called the client directly to explain the situation and apologize for the scheduling disruption. The conversation was painful. They'd specifically chosen Thompson Construction based on our reputation for meeting deadlines and maintaining project schedules. By lunchtime, Rebecca had made management decisions affecting 4 separate projects, and every decision had created either additional costs, timeline delays, or client relations problems. But she approached each situation with the same confident authority, apparently convinced that her business education qualified her to override the practical considerations that experienced construction managers understood instinctively. The most revealing moment came during a client call about the Riverside Shopping Center project. The client expressed concerns about communication coordination and wanted confirmation that their project timeline would be maintained despite recent management changes. Rebecca handled the call with professional confidence, assuring the client that Thompson Construction was implementing improved management systems that would enhance project coordination and timeline adherence. She spoke fluently about quality assurance protocols, stakeholder communication strategies, and performance optimization measures. It sounded impressive until you realized she was describing theoretical business concepts rather than addressing the client's specific concerns about concrete delivery schedules, permit coordination, and weather contingency planning. The client ended the call politely but with obvious confusion about whether Rebecca actually understood their project requirements. I added detailed notes about the conversation to my documentation log, along with follow-up actions that would be necessary to address the client's actual concerns versus the theoretical solutions Rebecca had offered. By mid-afternoon, Patricia approached my desk with the worried expression she'd worn constantly during Rebecca's previous management tenure. "Alex, I'm getting calls from subcontractors asking about project changes and schedule modifications. They're confused about who's authorizing decisions and what the new timelines actually mean for their work schedules." "What kind of confusion?" "The Henderson concrete contractor wants to know if the delay is permanent or if they should hold Thursday open in case the decision gets reversed. The medical building electrical inspector is asking whether Tuesday's rescheduled inspection is definite or tentative." Everyone's trying to plan their work schedules, but Rebecca's decisions seem to change every few hours. The operational chaos was beginning exactly as I'd expected, but seeing it documented in real time was still sobering. Rebecca's management approach treated complex construction projects like theoretical business exercises where decisions could be revised and optimized without considering the practical implications for dozens of subcontractors, suppliers, and clients. "Patricia, document all the scheduling confusion and coordinate with the subcontractors to minimize disruption. If Rebecca changes her mind about any of these decisions, we need records of the operational impact. Are you building a case for the court hearing? I'm documenting reality. If Rebecca's management decisions improve project outcomes and client satisfaction, that will strengthen her legal position. If they create operational problems and client dissatisfaction, that will speak for itself." The afternoon brought new developments that even I hadn't anticipated. Rebecca called a company-wide meeting for 4 o'clock, announcing that she wanted to address operational changes and management improvements with all employees. The meeting was held in our largest conference room, with Thompson Construction's entire staff crowded around the table and spilling into extra chairs. Rebecca had prepared what appeared to be a formal presentation, complete with printed handouts and a laptop for displaying charts and graphs. "Thank you all for taking time from your important work." Rebecca began with the kind of professional polish that came from business school presentation training. "I want to discuss the management changes that will position Thompson Construction for improved efficiency and growth." She spent 15 minutes outlining her vision for streamlined operations, enhanced client communication, and modernized project management systems. The presentation was polished and confident, full of business terminology about optimization, synergies, and performance metrics. But as Rebecca continued, I noticed the expressions on our employees' faces. Mike Stevens, who'd been managing job sites for 12 years, looked increasingly confused. Danny Rodriguez, our lead electrician, kept glancing at me with obvious concern. Patricia took notes, but with the careful neutrality of someone documenting a situation rather than embracing new management direction. The disconnect became obvious when Rebecca opened the meeting for questions. Mike Stevens raised his hand tentatively. "Rebecca, these new communication protocols sound good in theory, but how do they work when we're dealing with weather delays and client changes? Like if it's raining and we can't pour concrete, do we really need to file a formal notification and wait for management approval before rescheduling?" Rebecca's answer revealed everything wrong with her approach. "Mike, proper project management requires systematic documentation and approval processes. Weather contingencies should be anticipated in advance through comprehensive planning rather than reactive decision-making. But what if the weather forecast changes overnight? What if we get surprise rain on a day when we planned concrete work? Those scenarios should be addressed through improved forecasting and contingency planning rather than ad hoc schedule modifications." Mike exchanged glances with Danny Rodriguez, and I could see both men struggling to understand how Rebecca's theoretical management concepts would work in the practical reality of construction projects where weather, material deliveries, and client changes required constant adaptation and immediate decisions. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Rebecca outlining organizational charts, reporting structures, and performance evaluation systems that sounded impressive but had little connection to the day-to-day realities of managing construction projects. When the meeting ended, several employees lingered to ask quiet questions about how the new management changes would affect their work responsibilities and project assignments. Their concerns were practical and immediate. Would they still report to me for technical guidance? How would emergency decisions get made when Rebecca wasn't available? What happened if clients had questions that required construction expertise rather than business management theory? I answered their questions as carefully as possible, explaining that Rebecca had legal authority for management decisions, but that I remained available for technical support and project coordination. It was an awkward arrangement that satisfied no one, but it was the only way to comply with the court order while maintaining some operational continuity. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the day's documentation and preparing for the formal court hearing that would determine Thompson Construction's future management structure. The evidence was already substantial: client complaints, project delays, contractor confusion, and employee concerns that painted a clear picture of Rebecca's management impact. But I was also thinking about Mom, fighting her cancer battle in a hospital room 40 miles away, and Dad, trying to support her through the most critical phase of treatment while his family business collapsed into legal warfare and operational chaos. The next few days would determine whether Thompson Construction survived as a competent construction company or became a cautionary tale about family businesses destroyed by legal battles and misplaced loyalty. Either way, I was determined to ensure that when Mom recovered and Dad returned to active involvement, they'd find a company worth preserving rather than wreckage to rebuild. The phone rang at 10:30 that night. Dad's voice was exhausted but determined.
Alex, how bad is it?
I spent 20 minutes walking through Rebecca's management decisions and their operational impact. Dad listened without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about specific project delays or client concerns. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Son, your mother asked me to tell you something. She said that Thompson Construction represents 25 years of honest work and fair dealing, and she doesn't want that legacy destroyed by family politics or legal maneuvering. She wants you to fight for the company's reputation and the employees who depend on us, regardless of whatever legal battles Rebecca decides to wage." "How is she doing, Dad?" "Better today. The doctors adjusted her medication, and she's responding well to the new protocol, but she's worried about the business and what this family conflict is doing to everything we built together. Tell her not to worry. Thompson Construction will be here when she's ready to come back. Whatever it takes, however long this legal battle goes on, the company will survive and maintain the standards she and you established." "I know it will, Alex, because you understand what really matters in this business, and you won't let legal technicalities or family politics compromise the work that feeds our employees' families." After we ended the call, I looked out my apartment window at the lights of Cedar Rapids, thinking about all the buildings Thompson Construction had helped create over 25 years. Shopping centers and office buildings, schools and hospitals, homes where families would live for generations, all of it built through the kind of careful, honest work that created lasting value rather than temporary profit. Rebecca could hire expensive lawyers and win court orders, but she couldn't change the fundamental reality that construction succeeded or failed based on competence, experience, and commitment to quality results. The next few days would test whether legal authority could override those practical requirements, or whether reality would ultimately triumph over theory. Either way, Thompson Construction would emerge from this crisis with a clearer understanding of what mattered most: the daily work of turning plans into buildings that served the people who used them, completed by employees who took pride in honest craftsmanship, and satisfied clients who trusted us with their most important projects. That was Mom and Dad's legacy, and no legal battle or family conflict would be allowed to destroy it. Family business stored. Final part. Jonathan Mitchell settled into his chair with the practiced ease of someone who specialized in hostile corporate negotiations. His portfolio was thick with documents, and his expression carried the kind of confident aggression that suggested he'd already decided how this meeting would end. "Let's dispense with pleasantries and address the central issue," he began, his voice carrying the crisp authority of expensive legal education. "My client, Rebecca Thompson, has retained my services to address what appears to be a clear breach of management agreements and unlawful interference with her established authority within Thompson Construction." Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but I kept my expression neutral, waiting to see exactly what cards they thought they were holding. Mitchell continued, Miss Thompson was promised full project management authority by the company owner, her father, in recognition of her superior business education and professional experience in commercial development. This authority was exercised for a brief period before being illegally usurped by her brother, causing significant professional damage and interference with her legitimate business relationships. The phrasing was carefully constructed legal language designed to create the impression of binding contracts and unlawful actions, but I noticed what Mitchell wasn't saying. He wasn't claiming written agreements or documented promises. He was building a case based entirely on verbal understandings and Rebecca's interpretation of family discussions. Mr. Mitchell, I said calmly, could you specify exactly what management agreements you're referring to? Are we talking about written contracts, signed documents, or recorded verbal commitments? His smile was sharp as a blade. Employment law recognizes verbal agreements as binding contracts when there's clear evidence of offer, acceptance, and performance. Miss Thompson relocated from Chicago, assumed management responsibilities, and began executing her duties based on explicit promises from company ownership. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice tight with controlled anger. Dad promised me full authority over project management. He said the company needed modernization and professional oversight, and that my business education qualified me to lead operational improvements. That's not exactly what happened, Dad said quietly, finding his voice for the first time since the meeting began. I asked Rebecca to help evaluate our processes and provide input on efficiency improvements. I never promised her complete control over ongoing projects. Mitchell's expression sharpened. Mr. Thompson, my client has documented evidence of the authority she was granted and the promises that were made. Phone recordings, email correspondence, and witness statements that establish clear contractual obligations. The threat was unmistakable. Rebecca had apparently been recording family conversations and documenting Dad's words in ways that could be twisted to support her legal claims. It was a breathtaking betrayal of trust that revealed just how calculated her entire family intervention had been. But there was something else in Mitchell's presentation that didn't quite add up. His confidence seemed slightly forced, and he was relying heavily on legal intimidation rather than presenting specific evidence that suggested their case might not be as strong as they wanted us to believe. Mr. Mitchell, I said, leaning back in my chair, I'm curious about something. Your firm Harrison, Mitchell and Associates, also represents clients in commercial real estate development, correct? For the first time, Mitchell's composure flickered. Our firm handles a variety of corporate matters. I'm not sure how that's relevant to this management dispute. It's relevant because your colleague William Harrison approached me just yesterday about an $8 million mixed-use development project, contingent on Thompson Construction, demonstrating stable, competent management. Rebecca's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. That's completely unrelated to this discussion, is it? Because my understanding is that you worked for a commercial real estate development firm in Chicago that specialized in exactly these types of projects, and now you're here demanding control of Thompson Construction, just as major development opportunities are becoming available. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Mr. Thompson, you're engaging in speculation and conspiracy theories rather than addressing the legitimate contractual
claims we're presenting. But I could see doubt creeping into Dad's expression as he started connecting the same dots I'd been tracking for the past 24 hours. Rebecca's timing, her aggressive pursuit of management authority, her willingness to risk company stability, it was all starting to make sense as part of a much larger strategy. Rebecca, Dad said slowly, did you know about this development project before you came home? I came home to help during Mom's cancer treatment, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. That's not what I asked. Did you know about the Harrison development opportunity before you decided to get involved in company management? The silence stretched for long seconds. Mitchell started to speak, but Rebecca held up her hand to stop him. When she finally answered, her voice was different, colder, more calculating. I had industry contacts who mentioned development opportunities in the Cedar Rapids area. I thought Thompson Construction should be positioned to pursue major projects instead of staying trapped in small-time residential work. So you came home to position yourself to control access to contracts you'd learned about through your Chicago connections, I said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca's mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating ambition that had been driving her actions all along. Thompson Construction has been stagnating for years under Dad's conservative management and your limited vision. The company needs leadership that understands modern commercial development and has the industry relationships to secure major contracts. Leadership that nearly destroyed 3 existing contracts in 36 hours, I asked. Those were temporary setbacks while I established control and implemented proper management systems. The long-term benefits would have far outweighed short-term disruptions. The admission was breathtaking in its callousness. Rebecca had been willing to sacrifice existing client relationships and employee job security as acceptable collateral damage in her pursuit of controlling access to major development contracts. Dad looked at his daughter with an expression of profound disappointment and dawning horror. Rebecca, are you telling me that you deliberately risked our existing business to position yourself for contracts you might not even be able to secure? I'm telling you that Thompson Construction will never grow beyond a small local contractor without professional leadership and industry connections. Alex is competent at managing routine projects, but he doesn't have the education or relationships necessary to compete for major commercial development work. Mitchell sensed the conversation slipping away from his carefully prepared legal strategy and tried to regain control. These speculations about motives are irrelevant to the contractual obligations we're here to discuss. Miss Thompson was promised management authority, performed her duties in reliance on those promises, and suffered professional damages when that authority was improperly revoked. What professional damages? I asked. Rebecca's management tenure lasted 36 hours and nearly resulted in 3 contract terminations. If anything, we prevented further damage to her professional reputation by removing her from responsibilities she wasn't qualified to handle. The damage comes from the public perception that she was demoted due to incompetence rather than family politics, Mitchell replied. Her professional credibility in the commercial development industry has been compromised by the perception that she failed in her first major management role. It was a clever legal argument, trying to shift blame for Rebecca's failures onto the family dynamics rather than her actual performance, but it also revealed the weakness in their position. They were essentially arguing that Rebecca should be immune from accountability because being held responsible for her mistakes would damage her professional reputation. Mr. Mitchell, Dad said, his voice gaining strength, if Rebecca's professional reputation is damaged, it's because of her own actions and decisions, not because of family politics. She made choices that put client relationships and employee job security at risk. The consequences of those choices are hers to own. Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. You promised me that position, Dad. You said the company needed my expertise and professional background. You can't just take it back because Alex complained about my methods. I didn't take it back because Alex complained. I took it back because 3 major clients were threatening to terminate their contracts and the company was facing its worst operational crisis in 25 years. Those problems could have been resolved with proper support and patience. Instead, you panicked and undermined my authority at the first sign of difficulty. The argument revealed everything wrong with Rebecca's approach to business and family. She saw short-term crises as problems that other people should solve while she maintained authority and control. The actual consequences of her decisions, damaged client relationships, demoralized employees, financial losses were secondary concerns that shouldn't affect her management position. Mitchell tried one final legal gambit. Mr. Thompson, regardless of performance issues, verbal contracts create binding legal obligations. If you promised management authority to my client, you cannot unilaterally revoke that authority without proper legal process and documentation. What proper legal process? I asked. This is a family-owned construction company, not a publicly traded corporation. Dad has the authority to make management decisions based on what's best for the business, especially when those decisions prevent major financial losses and protect employee job security. Employment law doesn't recognize exceptions for family businesses when it comes to contractual obligations and wrongful termination. Mitchell replied. Then let's talk about employment law, I said, reaching for the folder Patricia had prepared. Rebecca was never formally employed by Thompson Construction. She has no written employment agreement, no documented job description, no established compensation structure, and no official title or position within the company. I spread the employment documents across the table. She was a family member who volunteered to help evaluate company operations. When that evaluation created operational problems, her involvement was discontinued. There's no employment contract to breach and no termination to challenge. Mitchell's expression darkened as he realized his legal strategy was collapsing. Without formal employment status, Rebecca's claims about binding management agreements became much harder to support. She couldn't claim wrongful termination if she was never actually employed, and verbal promises about undefined responsibilities weren't the same as contractual obligations. But Rebecca wasn't finished. Fine, she said, her voice sharp with anger and desperation. If you want to play legal games, let's talk about the real issue here. Thompson Construction is a family business, and I'm entitled to equal consideration for leadership roles and succession planning. Equal consideration based on what qualifications? I asked. Based on being Robert Thompson's daughter and having professional business education that Alex completely lacks. The entitlement in her voice was staggering, but it also revealed the core of her entire strategy. Rebecca believed that family connection and formal education automatically qualified her for management authority, regardless of experience, competence, or results. Dad's response was quiet but decisive. Rebecca, being my daughter doesn't entitle you to control of my company, especially if that control threatens the livelihoods of people who've worked with us for years. And business education without practical experience isn't qualification for managing complex construction projects. So you're choosing Alex over me based on favoritism and gender bias, she said, playing her final card. I'm choosing competence over credentials and results over theories. Alex has 8 years of successful project management experience. He has relationships with clients, suppliers, and subcontractors that took years to build. He understands construction from the ground up, and he's proven that he can handle crisis situations without destroying client relationships. Rebecca stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This isn't over. If you think you can shut me out of my family's business and my inheritance prospects without legal consequences, you're mistaken. Mitchell gathered his documents with practiced efficiency, his confidence finally showing cracks. Mr. Thompson, you'll be hearing from us regarding formal legal action. We'll be pursuing all available remedies for breach of contract, wrongful termination, and interference with legitimate business relationships. After they left, Dad and I sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing what had just been revealed about Rebecca's motivations and methods. The conference room felt smaller somehow, tainted by the ugliness of calculated family betrayal and mercenary ambition. I never thought she'd record our conversations, Dad said finally. I never imagined my own daughter would treat family discussions as evidence for legal proceedings. Dad, Rebecca stopped thinking of this as a family business a long time ago. For her, Thompson Construction is just an asset to be controlled and monetized. The fact that it represents 25 years of your and Mom's work doesn't matter to her. Dad rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 64 years. What do we do about her legal threats? We document everything, maintain professional standards, and focus on proving that Thompson Construction is stable and competent under current management. The best defense against Rebecca's legal strategy is continued success with existing clients and new opportunities. As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. William Harrison's name appeared on the screen. Alex Thompson, I answered. Mr. Thompson, William Harrison, I trust you've had time to consider our development opportunity. I looked at Dad, who nodded encouragement. Yes, Mr. Harrison. Thompson Construction is very interested in discussing the project in detail. Excellent. However, I should mention that we've become aware of some management instability at your company.
My partner Jonathan Mitchell mentioned he's been involved in discussions about internal authority disputes. The web of connections was finally complete. Harrison and Mitchell weren't just law partners, they were coordinating Rebecca's legal strategy with the development opportunity to create maximum pressure on Thompson Construction. If we didn't submit to Rebecca's management demands, we'd lose access to the $8 million contract. If we did submit, we'd be putting our most important client relationship in the hands of someone who'd already proven catastrophically incompetent. But there was something Mitchell and Rebecca hadn't counted on: the possibility that their scheme was too obvious and too manipulative to succeed. Mr. Harrison, I said, I appreciate your concern about management stability. Would you be available for a meeting tomorrow morning to discuss Thompson Construction's management structure and our approach to major projects? I think you'll find that our recent internal changes have actually strengthened our operational capabilities. That would be appropriate. Shall we say 9 o'clock at our offices? Perfect. I'll bring our project portfolio and references from current clients. After ending the call, I looked at Dad with something approaching optimism for the first time in days. Dad, I think Rebecca and her lawyer friends just made a critical mistake. They're so focused on legal manipulation and inside dealing that they've forgotten the most important factor in any business relationship: competence. What do you mean? Harrison's client wants to hire a construction company that can deliver $8 million worth of quality work on time and within budget. Rebecca's legal games don't change the fact that she nearly destroyed 3 contracts in 36 hours. All we have to do is demonstrate that Thompson Construction under current management can handle major projects better than Thompson Construction under Rebecca's management. Dad's expression brightened slightly. You think we can turn this around? I think we're about to find out what happens when competence competes with manipulation, and in construction, competence usually wins. The next morning, I arrived at Harrison, Mitchell and Associates carrying a leather portfolio containing 8 years of Thompson Construction project documentation, client references, and financial performance records. William Harrison's office was everything you'd expect from a high-end law firm: mahogany furniture, law books, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Harrison himself was more impressive in person than over the phone, with the kind of gravitas that came from decades of successful corporate practice. But sitting beside him was Jonathan Mitchell, Rebecca's legal counsel, which confirmed that this meeting was as much about legal maneuvering as business evaluation. Mr. Thompson, Harrison began, thank you for making time to discuss this development opportunity. As I mentioned, we have some concerns about management stability at your company. I understand your concerns, I replied, opening my portfolio. Let me address them directly with performance data and client references. I spent the next 30 minutes walking through Thompson Construction's project history, client satisfaction ratings, and financial performance under my management. I showed them completed projects, budget adherence records, and timeline documentation that demonstrated consistent competence over 8 years of increasingly complex contracts. These are impressive results, Harrison acknowledged. But we're concerned about recent operational disruptions and family conflicts that might affect future performance. Mr. Harrison, every family business faces succession and management challenges. The question isn't whether those challenges exist, but how they're resolved. Thompson Construction has chosen to prioritize competence and results over family politics and theoretical credentials. Mitchell leaned forward. Mr. Thompson, are you aware that your sister has extensive experience in commercial real estate development that could be valuable for projects of this scale? I'm aware that Rebecca worked for a development firm in Chicago until she was terminated 8 months ago for performance issues. I'm also aware that her attempt to manage Thompson Construction's operations resulted in near-catastrophic failures with 3 major clients. The bluntness of my response clearly caught them off guard. They'd apparently expected defensive family loyalty rather than direct acknowledgement of Rebecca's failures. Harrison studied the project documentation for several minutes before speaking. Mr. Thompson, your company's performance record is genuinely impressive. The client references are particularly strong, and your financial management appears sound. However, Mitchell interjected, there are still concerns about legal challenges from family members who feel their management rights have been violated. I looked directly at Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, let me ask you a question as both Rebecca's legal counsel and a partner in the firm representing your client. If legal threats and family conflicts were more important than actual performance and competence, would your client really want to entrust $8 million in construction contracts to Thompson Construction under any management? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mitchell's dual representation created an inherent conflict of interest that undermined his credibility on both sides. He couldn't simultaneously argue that Rebecca deserved management authority and that management disputes made Thompson Construction too risky for major contracts. Harrison seemed to recognize the contradiction. That's an excellent point, Mr. Thompson. Our client's primary concern is successful project completion, not internal family dynamics or legal positioning. Then let me propose something, I said. Give Thompson Construction a smaller initial contract, perhaps one of the office buildings or retail components. Judge us based on performance, timeline adherence, and quality standards. If we exceed your expectations, we can discuss additional project phases. If we fail to meet professional standards, you can terminate the relationship without major financial exposure. It was a calculated risk, offering to prove ourselves through actual performance rather than legal maneuvering or family politics, but it was also the only strategy that played to Thompson Construction's genuine strengths while exposing the weakness of Rebecca's approach. Harrison and Mitchell exchanged glances before Harrison spoke. That's a reasonable proposal. We could structure the initial contract for the primary office building, approximately $2 million in construction value, with options for additional phase. Excellent. When would you need our formal proposal? End of next week. The client wants to begin construction in early spring, which means we need to finalize contractor selection and permitting by the end of November. As I gathered my materials to leave, Mitchell made one final attempt. Mr. Thompson, you should be aware that family legal challenges could complicate bonding and insurance requirements for major contracts. Mitchell, you should be aware that baseless legal challenges from family members who lack standing or legitimate claims tend to be dismissed quickly by courts that understand the difference between real legal issues and strategic harassment. Harrison walked me to the elevator, leaving Mitchell behind in the conference room. Mr. Thompson, off the record, I'm impressed by your direct approach and your company's performance record. The development business requires contractors who can deliver results under pressure, and you seem to understand that reality. Mr. Harrison, construction is ultimately about turning plans into buildings that work for the people who use them. Everything else is just politics and paperwork. He smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. I think we understand each other. You'll have our formal proposal request by Monday. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like Thompson Construction was moving in the right direction, not through legal manipulation or family politics, but through the simple demonstration of competence and reliability that had always been our competitive advantage. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Fletcher. Found what you were looking for. Rebecca had extensive contact with Harrison's client while working in Chicago. She knew about the Cedar Rapids project 6 months before she came home. Full report attached. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Rebecca's entire family intervention had been planned months in advance, based on inside knowledge of development opportunities she'd learned about through her Chicago connections. Her return home, her pursuit of management authority, even her legal threats, all of it had been calculated to position herself to control Thompson Construction's access to the most lucrative contracts in the company's history. But like many people who confused manipulation with intelligence, Rebecca had made a fundamental error. She'd assumed that controlling access to opportunities was more important than the competence to execute them successfully. She'd forgotten that in construction, clients ultimately care about results, not relationships or legal positioning. 3 weeks later, Thompson Construction received formal notification that we'd been selected for the first phase of Harrison's development project. The initial contract was worth $2 million, with performance incentives that could lead to additional phases, totaling the full $8 million project value. Rebecca's legal threats had faded into expensive attorney consultations that produced no actual lawsuits, mainly because Mitchell had apparently advised her that employment law claims, without documented employment agreements, were unlikely to succeed. Her grand strategy of using legal pressure to force her way back into management control had collapsed when confronted with the reality that competence mattered more than credentials or family connections. More importantly, Mom's aggressive chemotherapy treatment was showing positive results. The tumors were shrinking, and Dr. Foster was cautiously optimistic about long-term prognosis. Dad was spending more time at the office again, his energy restored by the combination of good medical news and business success. I found him in the conference room one afternoon, reviewing architectural plans for the Harrison project, and looking more like his old self than he had in months. "You know," he said without looking up from the blueprints, "your mother always said you had the best instincts of any of us when it came to understanding people and situations. I just tried to focus on what actually mattered instead of getting distracted by what people claimed mattered." He nodded thoughtfully. "Rebecca came by yesterday. She wanted to apologize for the legal threats and ask about working together on future projects. What did you tell her?" "I told her that Thompson Construction would always be willing to work with competent professionals who understood that client success comes before personal ambition, but that management positions have to be earned through performance, not inherited through family connections or demanded through legal threats." "How did she take that?" Dad smiled. "About as well as you'd expect. But I think she's finally starting to understand that the construction business doesn't care about her MBA or her development industry contacts. It cares about getting buildings built properly, on time, and within budget." 6 months later, Thompson Construction completed the first phase of Harrison's development project, 2 weeks ahead of schedule and 5% under budget. The client was so impressed that they awarded us the contract for the entire remaining project, making it the largest single contract in company history. Rebecca eventually found a position with a commercial real estate firm in Des Moines, where her development experience and business education were apparently better suited to the theoretical aspects of project planning rather than the practical challenges of construction management. We exchanged polite family conversation at holidays, but the competitive edge and manipulative calculation had gone out of her interactions with Thompson Construction. Most importantly, Mom's cancer went into complete remission. Dr. Foster credited the aggressive treatment protocol with eliminating all detectable tumor activity, though regular monitoring would continue for years to ensure the cancer didn't return. The night we celebrated completion of the Harrison project, Dad and I sat in the conference room, looking at photographs of the finished office building. It was an impressive structure, with clean lines and quality materials that would serve the Cedar Rapids business community for decades. "You know what the real lesson is in all this?" Dad asked. "That competence beats credentials every time, that too. But the bigger lesson is about what makes a business worth preserving. It's not the buildings we construct or the contracts we sign. It's the relationships we build with people who trust us to do honest work for fair prices." Rebecca never understood that, and it's why she never would have succeeded at Thompson Construction, regardless of her education or family connections. I looked around the conference room, where so many important decisions had been made over the years, where family conflicts had been resolved, and business strategies developed. The walls were lined with photos of completed projects, each one representing months of careful work and satisfied clients. "Dad, what happens when you decide to retire? How do we handle succession planning without creating the kind of family conflict we just went through?" He smiled. "We do what we should have done from the beginning. We base succession decisions on competence, performance, and commitment to the values that built this company. Family relationships are important, but they don't automatically qualify anyone for management responsibility, and if Rebecca ever wants to be involved again, then she'll have to prove herself through performance, just like everyone else. Thompson Construction isn't a family inheritance to be claimed, it's a business that has to earn success every day through competent work and satisfied clients. The Harrison Development Project led to additional commercial contracts that established Thompson Construction as one of Cedar Rapids' premier contractors. The company grew from 18 employees to 35, with expanded capabilities in commercial and industrial construction that complemented our traditional residential work. Rebecca's attempt to seize control through legal manipulation and family politics had ultimately strengthened Thompson Construction by forcing us to articulate our values and demonstrate our competence under pressure. The crisis had revealed what mattered most, not credentials or connections, but the daily work of building things that lasted and treating people fairly in the process. Sometimes the best way to protect what you've built is simply to keep building it better than anyone else can. In construction, as in families, competence and integrity matter more than politics and positioning, and when those values are tested, they either prove themselves or they don't. Thompson Construction's values proved themselves, and that made all the difference. The formal court hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday in Judge Margaret Hendricks' courtroom, a venue I'd never imagined would determine the fate of Thompson Construction. Victoria Blackwood herself would be representing Rebecca, while I'd managed to secure representation from James Walsh, a construction law specialist who understood the technical complexities of our industry better than most attorneys. The intervening days passed in a surreal blur of documented disasters and mounting evidence. Rebecca's court-ordered management authority had given her complete control over Thompson Construction's operations, and she was exercising that control with the same combination of overconfidence and fundamental incompetence that had characterized her earlier failures. By
Wednesday morning, the Henderson family had filed a formal complaint demanding compensation for wedding reception delays caused by Rebecca's unnecessary concrete rescheduling. The medical building client had expressed serious concerns about timeline adherence and was considering penalty clauses for project delays. 3 subcontractors had called asking for clarification about conflicting instructions and constantly changing schedules. Most damaging of all, Rebecca had attempted to renegotiate supplier agreements without understanding the contractual implications, creating a billing dispute with our primary materials vendor that threatened to disrupt deliveries for all active projects. Her approach to the renegotiation had been to demand better terms based on Thompson Construction's improved management efficiency, apparently not realizing that supplier relationships were built on years of reliable payment history and mutual respect rather than theoretical business optimization. I documented each incident with the systematic thoroughness of someone building a comprehensive legal case, but I was also watching 25 years of carefully cultivated business relationships deteriorate under Rebecca's mismanagement. Every client complaint and contractor confusion represented potential long-term damage to Thompson Construction's reputation that might take years to repair. The most heartbreaking moment came Wednesday afternoon when Patricia quietly informed me that 2 of our most experienced workers, Mike Stevens and Danny Rodriguez, had received job offers from competing contractors and were considering leaving Thompson Construction rather than continuing to work under Rebecca's chaotic management. They don't want to abandon the company, Patricia explained, but they're worried about their professional reputations if they stay associated with projects that are consistently behind schedule and over budget. Other contractors are starting to poach our people by promising stable management and reliable project coordination. The brain drain threat was potentially catastrophic. Thompson Construction's competitive advantage had always been our experienced, skilled workforce and their relationships with clients and subcontractors. If Rebecca's mismanagement drove away our best people, the company might never recover even if we eventually resolved the legal disputes. That evening, I called Dad from the hospital parking lot after visiting Mom during her evening treatment session. She was looking stronger than she had in weeks, responding well to the adjusted chemotherapy protocol, but the stress of the family business crisis was clearly weighing on both of them. "How's the documentation coming for tomorrow's hearing?" Dad asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Comprehensive. Walsh says we have enough evidence to demonstrate that Rebecca's management decisions have created operational chaos, client dissatisfaction, and employee retention problems. The question is whether Judge Hendricks will focus on employment law technicalities or practical business results. What's Walsh's assessment of our legal position? Complicated. Rebecca's lawyers have done an impressive job of framing this as an employment discrimination case rather than a competence evaluation. They're arguing that family businesses can't arbitrarily revoke management authority based on subjective performance assessments." Dad was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the steady beep of medical equipment in the background. "Alex, whatever happens in court tomorrow, I want you to know that you've handled this situation with more maturity and strategic thinking than I could have managed. Your mother and I are proud of how you've protected the company and documented everything professionally. Dad, I just want Thompson Construction to be here when Mom recovers and you're ready to be actively involved again. This legal battle is temporary, but the company's reputation and employee relationships are permanent." "That's exactly the right perspective, son. Win or lose tomorrow, we'll figure out how to rebuild and move forward." But as I sat in the hospital parking lot after ending the call, I realized that rebuilding might not be possible if Rebecca's legal victory gave her permanent management authority. The documented evidence of her incompetence was overwhelming, but legal proceedings didn't always prioritize practical results over theoretical rights. The courtroom Thursday morning was smaller than I'd expected, with the kind of institutional neutrality that suggested countless family business disputes had been decided within these walls. Judge Hendricks was a woman in her 60s with the patient, slightly weary expression of someone who'd seen every variation of family legal warfare over decades of corporate litigation. Victoria Blackwood commanded attention the moment she entered the room, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit and carrying herself with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from winning cases through superior preparation and intimidation tactics. Rebecca sat beside her, looking nervous but determined, wearing her most professional business attire and carrying a thick folder of what appeared to be supporting documentation. James Walsh was quieter in his presentation but radiated the kind of competent authority that came from deep understanding of construction law and industry practices. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing my documentation with the systematic thoroughness of someone who understood that technical details often determined legal outcomes. Judge Hendricks called the hearing to order with businesslike efficiency. "This is a motion for preliminary injunction regarding management authority at Thompson Construction, a family-owned contracting business. Miss Blackwood, please present your client's position." Blackwood rose with theatrical precision, her opening statement delivered with the kind of polished aggression that had made her reputation in corporate litigation. "Your Honor, this case involves a clear pattern of employment discrimination and contractual interference that has caused substantial professional damage to my client, Rebecca Thompson. Miss Thompson was promised management authority by the company owner, her father, based on her superior business education and professional experience in commercial development. She spent 20 minutes outlining Rebecca's qualifications, her MBA education, her experience with commercial real estate development in Chicago, and her systematic approach to modernizing Thompson Construction's operations. The presentation was impressive, painting Rebecca as a qualified professional whose legitimate management authority had been illegally undermined by family jealousy and gender bias. My client performed her management duties competently and professionally until her brother, acting without authority and motivated by personal resentment, interfered with her legitimate business relationships and operational decisions. This interference has caused irreparable harm to Miss Thompson's professional reputation and career prospects. Blackwood presented phone recordings of Dad's conversations with Rebecca about her potential role in the company, email exchanges discussing operational improvements, and documentation of Rebecca's initial management decisions. The evidence was carefully curated to support her narrative of legitimate authority being wrongfully revoked. Your Honor, employment law doesn't recognize family business exceptions when it comes to contractual obligations and discriminatory treatment. Ms. Thompson is entitled to the management authority she was promised and the professional respect she has earned through education and experience. Judge Hendricks listened without expression, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification about specific legal claims. When Blackwood finished, the judge turned to Walsh. Mr. Walsh, please present your client's response. Walsh's approach was completely different from Blackwood's theatrical aggression. He spoke quietly and methodically, focusing on documented facts rather than legal theories. Your Honor, this case isn't about employment discrimination or contractual obligations. It's about whether family members have unlimited authority to make business decisions regardless of their competence or the consequences for clients, employees, and company operations. He opened with Thompson Construction's 25-year history of successful projects, satisfied clients, and stable employee relationships. Then he methodically walked through Rebecca's actual management performance, using my documentation to demonstrate the operational chaos and client dissatisfaction that had resulted from her decisions. During Ms. Thompson's initial management tenure, 3 major clients threatened contract termination due to missed deadlines and communication failures. Multiple subcontractors reported confusion about project schedules and conflicting instructions. The company faced potential penalty clauses and client relations problems that required immediate intervention to prevent serious financial losses. Walsh presented the Henderson family complaint about wedding reception delays, the medical building client's concerns about timeline adherence, and the supplier contract dispute that had threatened material deliveries. Each incident was documented with timestamps, client correspondence, and contractor statements that painted a clear picture of management incompetence. More importantly, Your Honor, Ms. Thompson's recent court-ordered return to management authority has created identical problems. Project delays, client complaints, contractor confusion, and employee retention concerns that directly contradict her claims of professional competence. He handed Judge Hendricks my comprehensive documentation file, organized chronologically to show the pattern of operational problems that occurred specifically during periods when Rebecca held management authority. This isn't about family discrimination or gender bias. It's about protecting a successful business, its employees, and its clients from management decisions that create operational chaos and financial losses. Judge Hendricks spent several minutes reviewing the documentation, her expression growing increasingly serious as she absorbed the evidence of repeated client complaints and project delays. Miss Blackwood, she said finally, how does your client explain the documented pattern of operational problems that occurred during her management tenure? Blackwood's response was smooth but evasive. Your Honor, construction projects involve complex variables and multiple stakeholders. Temporary adjustment issues are normal when implementing improved management systems. Ms. Thompson's long-term strategic vision was being undermined by resistance from employees who were comfortable with outdated practices. But these aren't minor adjustment issues, Judge Hendricks replied, holding up several client complaint letters. These are formal complaints from clients threatening contract termination and demanding compensation for project delays. How does improved management result in deteriorated client relationships? Rebecca whispered urgently to Blackwood, who nodded before responding. Your Honor, my client believes that some of these problems were exaggerated or deliberately created by family members who wanted to undermine her management authority. The timing of certain issues suggests coordinated resistance rather than legitimate operational concerns. The accusation hung in the courtroom air like an unexploded bomb. Rebecca was claiming that I had sabotaged projects and manipulated client relationships to make her look incompetent, turning the entire legal proceeding into a character assassination trial rather than a competence evaluation. Judge Hendricks turned to me directly. Mr. Thompson, how do you respond to these allegations? I stood, feeling the weight of Thompson Construction's future resting on my next words. Your Honor, I would never deliberately harm client relationships or sabotage company projects.
Those clients and projects represent my family's life work and the livelihoods of 18 employees who depend on Thompson Construction for their income. But you do acknowledge that you disagreed with your sister's management decisions. I disagreed with decisions that created operational problems and client dissatisfaction. But my disagreement was based on documented results, not personal animosity. Construction management isn't a matter of opinion, it's measurable through timeline adherence, client satisfaction, and project outcomes. Walsh stepped forward. Your Honor, if I may present additional evidence that addresses these sabotage allegations. He handed Judge Hendricks a folder containing statements from Thompson Construction employees, subcontractors, and clients. Each statement described their direct interactions with Rebecca during her management tenure, documenting specific incidents of confusion, miscommunication, and operational problems. These are independent third-party observations of Ms. Thompson's management performance, Your Honor. Clients and contractors who have no stake in family disputes but direct experience with the operational consequences of her decisions. Judge Hendricks reviewed the statements with obvious interest. Patricia Wells described Rebecca's failure to coordinate concrete deliveries and permit inspections. Mike Stevens detailed confusion about project schedules and conflicting instructions. The Henderson family documented communication breakdowns that had forced them to reschedule their daughter's wedding reception. Most damaging of all was a statement from the medical building client expressing concern about Thompson Construction's recent management instability and timeline reliability. They specifically mentioned considering contract termination if project delays continued. Ms. Blackwood, Judge Hendricks said these third-party statements appear to corroborate the operational problems documented by the defendants. How do you explain independent contractors and clients reporting identical concerns about your client's management performance? Blackwood's confidence was finally showing cracks. Your Honor, construction projects are complex and temporary confusion during management transitions is normal. These statements reflect short-term adjustment issues rather than fundamental competence problems, but the issues appear to be recurring, not temporary. The same types of problems occurred during your client's initial management tenure and again after the temporary restraining order restored her authority. Rebecca leaned forward urgently. Your Honor, I have extensive education and professional experience that qualify me for construction management. My brother has never attended business school or studied modern management practices. Judge Hendricks studied Rebecca with the kind of patient attention that suggested she was evaluating character as much as legal arguments. Ms. Thompson, education and experience are certainly relevant qualifications, but this court must also consider practical results and measurable outcomes. Can you explain why your management decisions have consistently resulted in client complaints and project delays? Rebecca's answer revealed everything wrong with her approach to business and family relationships. Your Honor, change management always creates temporary resistance and operational challenges. My strategic vision for Thompson Construction requires patience and persistence to overcome institutional inertia and employee resistance to modernization. But we're not talking about employee resistance. We're talking about client complaints and contractor confusion. How does strategic vision address practical problems like missed deadlines and communication failures? Rebecca's response was a textbook example of business school theory disconnected from operational reality. She spoke about stakeholder management, change implementation curves, and systematic process improvement as if client complaints were theoretical problems that could be resolved through better strategic communication. Judge Hendricks listened with growing impatience, occasionally interrupting to ask for specific examples or concrete solutions. Each time Rebecca responded with more theoretical explanations that demonstrated her fundamental misunderstanding of construction management realities. Finally, Judge Hendricks called for a brief recess to review all the documentation and consider the legal arguments. During the 15-minute break, Walsh expressed cautious optimism about our position. The judge seems focused on practical results rather than theoretical rights, he said. Blackwood's legal arguments are technically sound, but they're being undermined by the documented evidence of operational failures. When court resumed, Judge Hendricks delivered her decision with the kind of measured authority that suggested careful consideration of both legal precedent and practical consequences. This case presents a conflict between theoretical employment rights and practical business competence. Ms. Thompson clearly has impressive educational credentials and professional background that would qualify her for many management positions. My heart sank as Judge Hendricks seemed to be accepting Rebecca's qualifications at face value. However, construction management requires specific technical knowledge and industry experience that cannot be learned in business school. The documented evidence shows a clear pattern of operational problems that occurred specifically during Ms. Thompson's management tenure. She held up my documentation file. Client complaints, project delays, contractor confusion, and employee retention concerns that directly correlate with management decisions. These aren't temporary adjustment issues or employee resistance. These are measurable business outcomes that affect real people and real financial obligations. Judge Hendricks turned directly to Rebecca. Ms. Thompson, your educational background is impressive, but education without relevant experience doesn't qualify someone for positions that require specialized technical knowledge. Construction management involves complex coordination of multiple trades, strict timeline adherence, and extensive client relationship management that takes years to master. More importantly, the evidence shows that your management decisions have consistently created operational problems and client dissatisfaction. Regardless of your intentions or theoretical qualifications, the practical results demonstrate that you lack the specific experience necessary for this particular management role. She paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. Therefore, I am dissolving the temporary restraining order and denying the motion for preliminary injunction. Thompson Construction's management decisions must be based on operational competence and business results, not family relationships or theoretical credentials. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the courtroom like a gunshot. Rebecca sat in stunned silence while Blackwood gathered her materials with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to both victories and defeats. Outside the courthouse walls shook my hand with genuine satisfaction. That was one of the clearest judicial decisions I've seen in a family business dispute. Judge Hendricks understood that competence matters more than credentials, especially in specialized industries like construction. What happens next? Can Rebecca appeal or file other legal challenges? She can try, but the documented evidence of operational failures makes any further litigation much more difficult. Employment law protects competent employees from discrimination, but it doesn't protect incompetent employees from accountability. The drive back to Thompson Construction felt surreal, like emerging from a parallel universe where legal theories mattered more than practical results. For weeks, I'd been living in Rebecca's world of strategic positioning and theoretical qualifications, trying to defend competence against credentials and results against theories. But Judge Hendricks' decision had restored the natural order where construction companies succeeded or failed based on their ability to complete projects successfully, maintain client relationships, and manage complex operations effectively. The legal battle was over, but the real work of rebuilding Thompson Construction's operations and reputation was just beginning. Patricia greeted me at the office with obvious relief and a stack of urgent messages from clients, contractors, and suppliers who'd heard about the court decision and wanted confirmation about management stability. "How many of these are good news?" I asked. "Most of them, actually. The Henderson family wants to reschedule their concrete work immediately. The medical building client is asking about expedited timeline recovery. 3 subcontractors are offering overtime rates to help catch up delayed projects." The response was gratifying but also sobering. Thompson Construction's reputation had been damaged by weeks of management instability and operational chaos, and rebuilding client confidence would require consistent performance over months of successful project completion. But there was something else in Patricia's expression. A combination of relief and anticipation that suggested more significant developments. "Alex, there's someone here to see you. He's been waiting in the conference room for about 20 minutes. I found William Harrison seated at our conference table reviewing what appeared to be architectural plans and financial projections. He looked up as I entered, his expression unreadable. Mr. Thompson, congratulations on resolving your management disputes. I trust the legal proceedings clarified the authority structure at Thompson Construction. Yes, sir. The court confirmed that management decisions should be based on competence and results rather than theoretical qualifications or family relationships. Harrison nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of practical business approach our development project requires. Construction management isn't an academic exercise, it's about turning complex plans into functional buildings on time and within budget. He spread the architectural plans across the conference table, revealing a mixed-use development project that was even larger and more complex than I'd imagined. Office buildings, retail spaces, residential units, and parking structures arranged in a carefully integrated design that would transform an entire section of Cedar Rapids' downtown area. This project represents approximately $12 million in construction contracts, Mr. Thompson. We need a contractor who can manage multiple trades, coordinate complex logistics, and maintain strict quality standards throughout an 18-month construction timeline. The numbers were staggering, representing more work than Thompson Construction had ever handled and the kind of opportunity that could establish us as a major regional contractor. But the complexity and scale would also test every aspect of our operational capabilities. Mr. Harrison, Thompson Construction is interested in discussing this opportunity, but I want to be completely transparent about our recent management challenges and the work required to restore full operational efficiency. I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Thompson. However, our evaluation process has been monitoring your company's performance throughout the recent legal proceedings. We're less concerned about temporary family disputes than long-term management competence and operational reliability. He handed me a thick folder containing project specifications, timeline requirements, and performance standards that would govern the development contract. We believe Thompson Construction under your management has the technical expertise and client relationships necessary for this project. Your handling of the recent crisis actually demonstrated the kind of leadership and problem-solving ability we need for complex development work. The irony was almost overwhelming. Rebecca's legal battle intended to establish her qualifications for managing major construction contracts had actually provided the testing ground that proved my competence to handle exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been pursuing. Mr. Harrison, when would you need our formal proposal response? 2 weeks for preliminary evaluation, final decision by the end of the month. This project will require significant bonding capacity and insurance coverage, but our preliminary research suggests Thompson Construction can meet those requirements. After Harrison left, I sat alone in the conference room surrounded by the architectural plans for what could be Thompson Construction's most significant project. The development would require expanding our workforce, upgrading our equipment capabilities, and establishing relationships with specialized subcontractors we'd never worked with before. But it would also represent the fulfillment of everything Dad and Mom had worked toward for 25 years, establishing Thompson Construction as a premier regional contractor capable of handling major commercial development projects while maintaining the quality standards and client relationships that had built our reputation. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Dad's voice carried an energy I hadn't heard in months. Alex, Patricia called and told me about the court decision and the Harrison meeting. How are you feeling about everything? Relieved about the legal battle, excited about the development opportunity, and grateful that we preserved the company through all the chaos Rebecca created. Your mother wanted me to tell you something. She said that Thompson Construction's future was never about family inheritance or educational credentials. It was about finding people who understood that construction work matters because it creates lasting value for communities and families. How is she doing, Dad? Better every day. The doctors are optimistic about her treatment response, and she's already talking about returning to help with the books once she's strong enough. And Rebecca? Dad was quiet for a moment. Rebecca is Rebecca. She'll probably find another situation where her business education fits better than it did with construction management. But I think this experience taught all of us something important about the difference between credentials and competence. What's that? that you can't manage what you don't understand, and you can't understand construction without experience, relationships, and genuine respect for the complexity of building things that last. 3 months later, Thompson Construction was awarded the Harrison development contract after a competitive bidding process that tested our technical capabilities, financial capacity, and project management experience. The contract signing ceremony was held in Harrison's conference room with Dad and Mom both present to witness Thompson Construction's transition into major commercial development work. Mom looked almost like her old self, her hair growing back curly and gray, her energy restored by successful cancer treatment and the satisfaction of seeing the family business achieve the growth she and Dad had always
envisioned. "You know what I'm proudest of?" she said as we reviewed the signed contracts. "That we proved competence matters more than credentials. That too. But mostly that we preserved the values that made Thompson Construction worth fighting for in the first place. Honest work, fair dealing, and genuine care for the people whose lives are affected by the buildings we create." The Harrison project was completed 8 months later, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, and within budget. The success led to additional development opportunities and established Thompson Construction as Cedar Rapids' premier commercial contractor. Rebecca eventually found a position with a real estate investment firm in Minneapolis, where her business education and development industry knowledge were better suited to the financial and strategic aspects of commercial real estate rather than the operational challenges of construction management. We exchanged polite family conversation at holidays, but the competitive edge and manipulative calculation had gone out of her interactions with Thompson Construction. The real victory wasn't legal or financial, though both were important. The real victory was proving that in business, as in construction, competence and integrity ultimately triumph over politics and positioning. Thompson Construction survived and prospered because we never forgot that building things well matters more than building arguments cleverly. Sometimes the best way to protect what you've built is simply to keep building it better than anyone else can. And sometimes the most dangerous threat to a family business isn't external competition, but internal conflict that forgets what made the business worth preserving in the first place. Thompson Construction emerged from the crisis stronger and clearer about its values: competence over credentials, results over theories, and honest work over legal maneuvering. Those values, tested by family conflict and legal warfare, proved themselves strong enough to build a future on, and that future, constructed one project at a time through experienced hands and careful attention to detail, would honor everything Mom and Dad had worked to create while providing opportunities for growth that none of us had imagined possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.